Hello, my name is Max, or the Technomancer, and I am the creator of the mod Crossroads. And I have received numerous requests to create a set of comprehensive video tutorials for the mod, because it's a very complicated mod that many people find confusing. So this is the first video in what will be a series of comprehensive video tutorials for Crossroads. So let's get started. By default, when you create a new world in Crossroads, you spawn with this item in your inventory, the Mysterious Journal. You will only spawn with this if the mod Guide API is installed. That mod is not required to use Crossroads, but it is to have the Mysterious Journal, and it is highly recommended. The Mysterious Journal functions as a documentation book, which has several sections. Basics, heat machines, rotary machines, fluid machines, miscellaneous, and magic, and another section can unlock, but we'll get to that later on. There are two versions of this book that can be changed between by crafting the book alone, the Technician's Manual and the Mysterious Journal. You spawn with the journal. What's the difference between them? Well, the Mysterious Journal has... the difference between them is explained in this section here, Read Me First. To summarize, the Mysterious Journal has lore. It has all the documentation you should need, but it also has several characters in the book who are conversing and doing the describing. It's got lore. It's got quite a bit. It's got quite a bit of humor in it as well. And the different characters are differentiated by different fonts. So we've got not fonts, italics, normal, underline, and a fourth character who is bold. If I can just get to it. If I could. Oh, yes, and so on. Now, so if you like humor and lore, then the Mysterious Journal is for you. It also has another thing, which is interesting, which is one of the characters, the fourth character, who is named Bobo. Well, as part of the storyline or the humor, they are this random person who is breaking into the room where the journal is stored, where these people are writing down this information, and is scribbling seemingly random notes in it. And these notes are seemingly nonsensical, like this is their note in the introduction. These notes, however, do provide interesting hints. There are certain features known as Bobo features, or usually Bobo items, which are only referenced in the Mysterious Journal. It is not in the Technician's Manual, and it is only referenced through Bobo's little hints. They are puzzles. Some of them are quite powerful, some of them not so much, and none of them are required for gameplay. But they can be quite useful. It's up to you to discover the recipes using the hints Bobo gives you, so you can create things like this item here. Which, I'm on full hunger, so I can't use it, but I'll go through the Bobo items in more depth later, but let me just get some hunger down. Now that I've lost a little hunger, if I eat this magenta bread, besides being an incredibly powerful food source, it is also quite a means of transportation. Yeah. This is one of the Bobo items, and like many Bobo items, its effect is rather unexpected and rather unusual. This effect will wear out in a moment. I'm not going to go through all the Bobo items, that was just an example of a Bobo item. I will get into crafting them later. So the Technician's Manual, on the other hand, as opposed to the Mysterious Journal, has no lore and has no reference to Bobo items at all. It is purely informational, just raw documentation, and that is all. So I've got that. I'll just put it over here. That is the documentation. to actually get started. Now that I've shown how to use the documentation, I should explain what the mod Crossroads is about. The mod Crossroads is about automating things. Except for the Bobo items, which are just little random helper utilities. But for the most part, the mod is about automation. And it's about challenging automation. There are no magic one-block solutions. My rule of thumb when using Crossroads is if you don't feel like a mad scientist after completing a build, you've done it wrong. Because completed builds will be very, very complicated, but made of simple components. Each component is simple enough for pretty much anyone to understand, but you combine them to make complicated systems. And it allows you to automate many, many things in vanilla that you cannot normally automate in just pure vanilla. Allow me to build a setup just to demonstrate what I'm talking about. Here is an example of a setup that performs a simple function, is made of simple parts, but is an incredibly complex setup. This is a machine that is usually where something of this sort is usually built early game in Crossroads. What does it do, you might ask? Well, it's actually quite simple. And what it does, it processes copper ore. I place a copper ore in this grindstone, which I will explain more fully later on. This is just an example of what I mean. Sand will get deposited in here, and if you're giving it a moment to run, I'm just going to throw a few more in. Actually, no, that's not. We will find that it has produced 2 copper ingots and 1 sand has gone in here. This whole machine is for ore doubling copper, and it only works on copper. However, this machine, which is quite a complex machine, could be easily expanded to do many other things as well, now that it's got basics in it, certain things in it. For example, I could easily take the setup and expand it slightly so that it also would be able to run up to 5 furnaces at double speed. I could also make a few modifications up here so that I could process anything in this grindstone without clogging up the system. In fact, this system that I'm staring at is far from ideal. There's many, many improvements that could be made to it, but it works just fine as it is. We will get into the details of how something like this works later on. So, now we're going to get to the ores. Crossroads adds 4 ores to the game. Native copper ore is only found higher up. The specific height it's found at is specified in the book, and I'm going to be honest, I've forgotten it for a moment. Native copper is only found between Y50 and Y70. If you mine it, it gives you 3 copper nuggets. It is quite common, but only found higher up. Normal copper ore is this green thing. It's only found below Y level 30. It's quite common lower down, and it just gives you itself. However, you cannot smelt this in a normal furnace. If I press U on it, there's no furnace recipe. In order to process normal copper ore, you'll need a setup somewhat like similar to this, although earlier on you would make a much simpler setup. A setup like this requires copper to make, so to get started processing the copper ore you find deeper down, you need to use those copper nuggets from native copper ore to make copper ingots. The reason for this is it means that early game you will need to try and create builds that are simple, very, very simple and cheap on copper in order to make it so you have to do less mining higher up to get native copper. Once you can process normal copper ore, it gives you 2 ingots per ore, and it's a much better way of getting copper than native copper ore. Tin is only found lower down, below Y level 30. is very rare. It's approximately as rare as gold ore. Now, in Crossroads, many things are made to be very realistic, or somewhat realistic. However, many things are made less realistic for gameplay reasons. Tin ore in real life is not particularly rare. However, in Crossroads, it is very rare, about as rare as gold, and you will want to mine any that you find. It's very valuable. It can be smelted in a normal furnace. It's made rare for gameplay reasons. Ruby ore is only found in the Nether, and is not found among netherrack, but is only found in pockets of nether quartz. So if you see a pocket of nether quartz ore, mine it, and you might see a ruby ore in it somewhere. It can only be mined with a diamond pickaxe or better, and drops a single ruby when mined. Rubies are used later on for the magic system, which people have said that the magic system doesn't seem very magical and is more technological, which I'm not going to argue with, but it is called the magic system nonetheless. Rubies are really for much later game. You do not need them to start out. A basic material you will need is bronze. Oops. There are several recipes to make bronze. You can make them 9 blocks of bronze. Now, the ratio of bronze is 1 tin ingot to 8 copper ingots. That will make 9 bronze ingots. So you can make use blocks of copper and tin to make blocks of bronze at a time, ingots to make a block of bronze, or you could use nuggets of copper and tin to make a single ingot of bronze. You don't need very much tin for bronze, but you do need a little bit. Most machines in Crossroads are made of bronze. To get started in Crossroads, you need to understand that there are 2 power systems very early on, and more later on as well. We're going to start with the, as of making this video, recently revamped heat system, which is the simpler of the 2. To get started with heat, you're going to probably want a thermometer. I'm not going to show all the recipes. In fact, I'm not going to show most of them, but this is how a thermometer is made. A thermometer measures the temperature of heat-using blocks. For example, if I use it over here, as you can see in the lower left of my screen, it is reading out temperatures. When I right-click on things, that is. So there's several ways to produce heat, but one of the simple early game ones is with a simple fuel heater. I'll get to how exactly it works in a moment, but that's a simple way to produce heat. Now, there's various heat cables that move heat. They're sort of like heat pipes. Now, in Crossroads, unlike in real life, heat is measured in degrees C instead of heat being measured in energy. In Crossroads, one temperature in one machine is 1 degree C in one machine can be transferred over to be 1 degree C in another machine. There is there's no concept of heat capacity or anything like that. Heat is made very simple on purpose. Heat can be transferred with these heat cables, and there's different materials that can be used to make heat cables. I'm going to show a few of them. Wool, packed ice, slime, obsidian are the basic ones. And every heat cable has a melting point and a loss rate. So, for example, wool heat cables will melt at 300 degrees C. If they hit 300 degrees C, something bad will happen. That will end up destroying the cable. With wool, the cable will catch on fire, will just turn into fire. It will burn. With slime, it will actually turn into a tiny slime, and the cable will be destroyed. With obsidian, which is 2,000 degrees, it will melt into lava. Ice melts at 0 degrees C, and it's actually quite cold in this biome. Oh, no, sorry. Ice cables are unique. Sorry. Ice melts at 0 degrees C, and it will just turn into water. Now, the reason it didn't melt when I placed it down is, well, we'll get to that. Each cable also has a loss. Ice has the lowest loss. Obsidian is very good. Wool has the highest loss. Basically, they're tiers. Now, you might wonder what is the point of having an ice heat cable to transfer heat if it's going to melt at 0 degrees, despite it having tiny loss. And it's quite simple. Some machines, not many, but a few, need to be kept cold instead of hot. And for those, you can use ice heat cables because you'll be keeping them below 0 degrees C, and you'll have an incredibly tiny amount of loss. So it's very good for that. They can't be used to transfer things that need to be heat for things that need to be kept hot, though, because they'll melt the cable. Most cables, when placed down, will go to the temperature of the environment. Ice cables are unique that they start at -10 degrees C, so they don't instantly melt when you place them down. This loss isn't just losing 0.25 degrees C per tick, it's moving 0.25 degrees C towards ambient temperature every tick. Ambient temperature depends on biome and elevation, but for the most part you don't really care what it is. Just assume it's somewhere around 20 degrees, 30 degrees, somewhere from 0 to 100, usually. So this fuel heater burns any fuel and produces heat. And this cable is going to heat up. It produces 1 degree C per tick while burning fuel, as the tooltip says. Now, if I just do this, we're going to watch the cable melt. Well, actually, it's going to burn because it's wool, but... While it's doing this, I should mention that there is a config option to disable heat cable melting. It won't stop them from melting, it'll just make it so that all heat cables will turn into fire. It will disable special effects, so instead of turning to lava, obsidian will turn to fire, slime will turn to fire, ice will turn to fire. This is a config option, it's disabled by default. Normally things do an effect based on what the insulator is. So how do we stop our heat cable from overheating? Well, if we're producing 1 degree C per tick and losing 0.25, we're going to have a net gain in temperature that's going to go on forever, or until this thing runs out of fuel, which is going to melt the cable. We need to have some way to lose at least 1 degree C per tick, and this thing was already hot, so it burned this. Well, we could do that with 4 wool heat cables, which will add up to 1 degree C per tick of loss, which will, as you'll see, it won't get hot. These things are transferring the temperature between them. It's not really heating up or cooling down, it's sort of bouncing around a tiny bit, but it'll basically stay whatever temperature it was at before now. However, that's not particularly useful. It's not useful to have a system that stays at room temperature for eternity, is it? Right? Also, with better heat cables, you're going to need an awful lot of heat cables to lose 1 degree C per tick, like with obsidian. The proper thing you should do, well, I'll get to that in a moment. Another thing you can do is, let's look at this heating chamber, which is the simplest machine that uses heat. It is basically a heat-powered furnace. It smelts things when it's above 200 degrees C. And it will use 2 degrees C per tick. Now the trick here is that you see it's when above 200 degrees C it uses heat. It doesn't say when running it uses heat, just when it's above that temperature. Whether it's running or not, if it's above 200 degrees C, it will use 2 degrees C per tick. If it's below 200 degrees C, it will not consume any heat per tick and it won't run. Well, if we think about this, just with this, with only 2 heat cables, then we've got a gain of 1 degree C per tick and a loss of 0.5 from the 2 wool heat cables, and these things will eventually melt. However, if I place this down, this heating chamber, then we've got a net gain of 0.5 when below 200 degrees C, and when we're above 200 degrees C, we're going to be gaining 1 and losing a total of 2.5. So what's going to effectively happen is it's going to be rising while it's above 200 and dropping while it's, rising when it's below 200 and dropping while it's above 200. So what is going to happen is it's going to stay right around 200 degrees C, as you can see, and this machine is going to run. Now, you'll notice it's running extremely slowly. Why is that? Well, if you think about it, this thing can consume 2 degrees C per tick. If we're only producing 1, or if you account for the heat cable's 1/2, then it's not really running non-stop. If it were running non-stop, then it would need to be able to consume 2 degrees C per tick, but it's only getting 0.5 getting put into it because half of it's lost, because we're only producing 1 and half's getting lost by the cables. So it's only running at 1/4 of the normal speed. We could improve this by using heat cables with a very small loss, like obsidian, and give it a moment to heat up again to 200 degrees C. And now it's receiving very close to 1 degree C per tick because the loss of the obsidian heat cables is very small. But it would ideally have 2 degrees C per tick, not 1. So now let's add a second fuel heater and let this heat up again. And you'll be seeing it's running a lot faster now. And it consumes heat even when it's not actually operating, when there's nothing to perform operations on. If I were to add a third fuel heater, we would be producing 3 degrees C per tick and only using 2 when above 200 degrees. So the cables would overheat because we're producing much more heat than we're using, so they'll just rise in temperature and eventually reach, for these cables, 2,000 degrees to melt. So what you want to do with heat is you want a system where below the operating temperature of the machines in it, such as the heating chamber, you have a net gain of heat, and at and above the operating temperature, you have a loss of heat, so that you stay at a safe temperature, and then you want to make it so that the loss when you're above the temperature is very small, so that you run very quickly. I hope that makes sense and is clear. Now, a fuel heater is it can be automated. Of course, you could set up a tree farm and feed this thing with charcoal or something, but it's not really, it's more of an early game heat production, if anything. I mean, you can automate it later game, you definitely can, and it's perfectly valid, but there are better ways, well, I'm not going to say better, there are other ways to produce heat. There's also ways to lose heat. This is a heat exchanger, and this is a very important device. First of all, and you can connect to any side of it except the bottom with heat cables. So no connecting to the bottom, but we can connect to the sides and the top. This machine has a loss of 10 degrees C, which is quite a big loss. You can use it as a way of just losing a lot of heat very quickly. So if you've got a system that's where you're producing much more than you're using, and you're afraid you think your cables will overheat, then you can use heat sinks to lower the net temperature gain or loss. That's one of their purposes. They have a second purpose though. If I press U on this heat exchanger, you'll note that there's some JEI integration for what looks like a crafting system. Although these recipes aren't particularly useful if you're to actually gain the outputs. It's what this is more useful for is, well, read this here: minimum temperature, heat added, and some of these are maximum temperature, heat added. What exactly is going on here? Well, the heat exchanger can exchange heat with blocks directly below it. And by exchange heat, I mean gain or lose heat while converting blocks below it into a different type. For example, if I place some ice below it, And also I'm going to put some blocks around this so that the resulting water doesn't flow out. Actually, I'm going to need a window here. Fine. Yes. If we look at it, it's 24 degrees C. If I place ice below it, it turned it into water. And, Now that's strange. Ugh. I'm sorry, I'm being silly. That's working perfectly fine. I'm just forgetting that I'm using a variant of heat exchanger that's not very efficient. It's working fine, I'm just being silly. I'll explain what that means in a moment. I was actually going to get to that. Let's use a different source than ice. In fact, let's not use a normal heat exchanger with this. My problem was that I used a bad device for this example. I should have shown this with an insulated heat exchanger. Sorry about that. It's working fine. An insulated heat exchanger is a bit of an oxymoron, yes, but the normal heat exchanger has two functions. The standard loss of 10 degrees C per tick, and the ability to exchange heat with things below it. The insulated heat exchanger only exchanges heat with things below it. It does not have a 10 degrees per C, 10 degrees C per tick loss. And I should have used one of these to demonstrate, because that'll be much clearer. It is working with the other one, it's just happening very quickly with the other one, so it's not obvious, very clear. It was my mistake. So if we look, this is 24 degrees. I'm going to put the ice under it. And it's now cooled down, as you can see. It was negative 24, and now it's negative 46. Sorry, it was before it was positive 24, and now it's negative 46. We've lost 70 degrees C. This cooled it down. And if this was below 50 degrees C, which now it is, now it's below 50 degrees C, it'll stop working. This is a minimum temperature of working. Now, it's not like the only recipe this thing can do is cooling. It has heating, certainly. If I light a fire under it, it'll extinguish the fire and heat it up. Now, it's quite cold right now, and it's not changing the heat because this is an insulated one. Actually, no, it's just not lighting. There we go. Lighting the fires has heated it up quite a bit. Now, a lot of the, well, there's quite a few ways to heat this up and cool it down. And all the recipes are, as I showed before, shown in JEI. Now, the trick with this thing is, you'll see it says here, change up to 25 degrees C per tick while running. The trick there is up to. When I put the fire under it, it adds quite a lot of heat. Although I wasn't quick enough quite to show it. You know, let me use a stronger heat source so that it's slower. Well, not slower, so that it lasts longer, then I can show you better. If I place some lava below it, you'll see that buffered heat. You see, when you produce heat or when you exchange heat with the environment with this device, it goes into the buffered heat section there, not the temperature section. And every tick, it moves 25 degrees C from the buffered heat section to temperature until buffered heat is at 0 degrees C. Basically, if you are continually heating this thing, right now it's too hot to absorb that lava, and it's going to stay that way because it's an insulated heat exchanger, of course, right? Then it'll basically be you can think of it as if you're keeping this thing supplied with either something that heats it or cools it, then you can think of this as a constant 25 degrees C per tick heat source / cooler. Now, the reason I say this is such a good heat source, when considering all those recipes don't seem very easy to automate, is they actually are, there is one that's easy to automate in particular early game, which is the lava. The reason being, it doesn't have to be a source block. Flowing lava works just as well. I'll see it go into the buffered heat section, and then, yes. So you don't actually consume anything to do this. You just need some sort of system that can keep breaking this. Now it's too hot to actually absorb the lava. You need some sort of system that can keep breaking the cobblestone. And there is absolutely a device that can do that in Crossroads early game, but we will get to that. So a normal heat exchanger can combine these two, so you would think of it, so since it's got the 25 degrees C per tick gain or change from the environment, and when you place certain blocks under it, and the 10 degrees C per tick loss, you can basically think of it as a constant 15 degrees C per tick source or cooler. That is, if you're using it to do the heat exchanging with the environment with, as opposed to just standard loss. I hope I explained that clearly. I feel like I may not have. Heat exchangers are very useful, and as you can see, this build has two normal ones, no insulated ones. We're slowly working towards explaining this build. Now, if I were to try and feed this thing with even just a normal heat exchanger, which again is like a 50, let's see, if I just try and feed this thing with a normal heat exchanger, and if I were to place some lava under it, and just for now manually keep breaking this block, what's going to happen is this machine's producing 15 degrees, well, this thing produces 25 degrees C per tick, is losing 10 on its own, this machine is losing 2, and the cables are losing some negligible amount. So we're ending up gaining, if we disregard the cables right now, which these are obsidian cables, so it's a very small amount that they're losing, so it's negligible. We're ending up net gaining 13 degrees C per tick while I keep breaking this block so that the buffered heat section doesn't run out. And what's going to happen is if I keep doing this, the cables are going to melt, because we're gaining a net of 13 degrees C. Now, per tick. We're approaching 2000 degrees C. We're very close, and at that point, the cables are going to melt. Yes, melted into lava, like I said. So, if we wanted to fuel a heating chamber off of a heat exchanger running lava constantly, what could we do? Well, even with just, well, we could have we could have a second heat exchanger that just to lose 10 degrees C. So now we're producing 25, we're losing 20 from the two heat exchangers, so we're gaining 5, and then we're losing 2 more from this thing, so we're gaining 3. But now our cables are gaining 3 degrees C per tick, which is still bad. So we're going to need a way to lose 3 more, so if we add 2 more heating chambers, then we'll be when we're below 200 degrees C, we will be gaining a net of have a net gain of 5 degrees C per tick. When we're above 200 degrees C, we'll be losing 1. And thus we'll stay, if I keep breaking this block and don't do this one, we'll stay at around 200 degrees C. So it just needs to heat up. And we've created a safe, stable system . And it's going to stay around 200 degrees C. Now, it would be nice to be able to say 2 of these are going to run full speed because they're gaining 2 degrees C. They're getting 2 degrees C per tick, and one of them's going to run at half speed because it's getting 1 degree C per tick. But what's really going to happen is that all 3 of them are going to run at about at slightly lower than normal speed. They're all going to run at, what is it, 5/6 speed or something like that, if we're based on the amount of heat we're losing. So, yes, and all 3 furnaces can be used at once. If I add some cobblestone, and if I get back to breaking that block so that we stay above 200 degrees C, I stopped doing it and it would cool down. But so far this still isn't very automated because I am still having to manually break this block. And Crossroads is a mod about automation, so we haven't really automated much of anything yet. Oh, and now these furnaces are running. Well, heating chambers, technically. So we need to get to automation. Well, like I said earlier, a good way to automate this is if we just had some automation that kept breaking this cobblestone. Well, what in Crossroads, that's early game, there are several things that can do it late game too. What early game device can break cobblestone? Well, this is a rotary drill. It's a giant drill. It spins and breaks and does various things. However, to use it, we need rotary power. As you can see, we've got these gears spinning. And we're going to, so now we're going to have to learn about rotary power. Also, I should mention that there are later game alternatives to the drill for breaking blocks. There's things like there's a giant mechanical arm that can move things around, pick up entities, throw mobs, move items around through chests, break blocks, place blocks, do all sorts of stuff. But is very difficult to control. There's magical beams that can do stuff. There's a lot of ways later on, but right now we basically have one option for breaking blocks, and that is this drill. So, how does rotary work? Well, rotary uses some real-life equations. However, they're not very difficult equations. Also, first off, before we start rotary, we're going to want this device which I invented for the mod, and by invented I made up, the speedometer. It's fairly cheap. And this is like the thermometer for rotary systems. As you can see, it's telling me two things there, the speed and the energy of this gear, and we'll get more in detail to those later on, and what those things mean later on. We're getting to that very soon. However, I feel like it would be better to cover rotary stuff in the next episode. So I'm going to end this video here, and next video we'll go more in detail into how gears work. Minor note I'm tacking on to the end of this video because I forgot earlier. There is a way to change the texture of heat cables to purely cosmetic variants. Well, not purely cosmetic variants. To change the texture of heat cables, this change is purely cosmetic. Right-clicking a heat cable with certain items, for example a diamond, an iron ingot, or a piece of nether quartz, will change the texture and replace the copper material. Coppery looking material. This does not at all change the properties of the cable, and you can change it back with a copper ingot. This does not consume the item you right-click it with either. This works on all heat cables.